Why hello there and welcome to Socket Sanctuary's 4th ever Shit Card Showdown, the budget battle for framerate fanatics, an arena where budget graphical solutions are put to their test. Today's contenders will be 10 used GPUs for the sub $35 price point. The graphics cards we will be testing today will be the NVIDIA GTX 260, the GTX 285, the GTX 460, the GT 520, and the 8400 GS. Team Red will be represented by the HD 4850, HD 7470, HD 5830, HD 4890, and the HD 7570. The games we will be benchmarking will be CSGO, Rocket League, Overwatch, World of Warships, Grand Theft Auto 5, and Battlefield 1. And the criteria that we will be testing the cards on will be price per frame, highest average frame rate, and overall value. We will be going in depth into different cards used, games used, and testing methodology. So in the description of the video there will be timestamps for all of the different sections. So if you'd like to skip to the benchmarks, you can. Or if you want to revisit a section, you can do that too. The cards that were chosen for this showdown were a selection of cards priced for $35 or less on the used market. The stated prices for each card is based off the trending sold listings on the North American version of eBay, so it's very likely that you could find a better card for this price or one of the selected cards at a cheaper price, but it would all depend on where you live, how long you look, and if you get lucky on the used market. But to simplify things and ensure that you can find one of these cards at the stated price, we are going with the trending sold listing. As for the selection, we chose 5 cards from both AMD and NVIDIA to represent themselves. From both power efficient to power hungry, low profile to full length and dual slot. If you're wondering why I didn't test a certain card, well, it's just because I can't fit all of the graphics cards out there in one showdown. So we did the best we could and got a wide selection from both major brands. Now onto the cards themselves. The first card we have is an NVIDIA GT 520. Originally released in April of 2011, this card sold for $60 new. Now you can pick it up for under $25. The NVIDIA GT 520 is based off the Fermi GF119 GPU with 48 CUDA cores at 1620 MHz shader clock and an 810 MHz core clock. This particular variant also comes with 1GB of GDDR3 with a 64-bit memory bus, giving it a memory bandwidth of 14.4 GB per second. In addition, this card is DX11 capable and is a single-slot low-profile card with no need for any PCIe power plugs, meaning it will fit in almost any existing system. The next card we have is a card you've seen before on this channel, the Revision 3 NVIDIA 8400 GS. This card's trending price on eBay is right around $19, making it a tempting deal. That is, until you learn more about it. And speaking of which, this card is based off of the Tesla microarchitecture GT218 GPU with 8 CUDA cores clocked at 1230 MHz and a core clock of 580 MHz. This particular variant has 1GB of GDDR3 and a 64-bit memory bus, giving it a paltry 9.6 GB per second memory bandwidth. This particular card is also DX 10.1 capable and is a single-slot, low-profile card with no need for any PCIe power connectors. The next card we're going to take a look at is the NVIDIA GTX 260. Initially released in 2008 for a price of around $300, you can now find it easily for $20. This particular GTX 260 is based off the Tesla microarchitecture GT200 GPU with 192 CUDA cores at a 1242 MHz shader clock and a 576 MHz core clock. It also comes with 896 megabytes of GDDR3 and a 448-bit memory bus and a 111.9 GB per second memory bandwidth. This particular card is also DX10 capable and a full-length dual-slot card with the need for 2 6-pin PCIe power plugs. The GTX 285 was the king of its day in 2009, initially priced at around $380. Now you can find it easily for around the $30 price point. Based off of the 55nm Tesla microarchitecture GT200 GPU, it has 240 CUDA cores at a 1476 MHz shader clock with a 648 MHz core clock. It also comes with 1GB of GDDR3 with a 512-bit memory bus and a memory bandwidth of 159 GB per second. This card is also a 2-slot GPU with the need for 2 6-pin PCIe power plugs. In addition, this card can use up to DirectX 10. The final NVIDIA GPU we are taking a look at is the GTX 460. The stats that I'm going to give are for this particular variant of the GTX 460, as there are multiple different versions with different core counts and shader clocks. That being said, all GTX 460s are based off of the 40nm DX11 capable Fermi architecture, and this particular version of the card is pretty heavily overclocked with 336 CUDA cores with a 1600 MHz shader clock and an 800 MHz core clock, about a 19% overclock over stock. It also comes with 1GB of GDDR5 with a 256-bit memory bus with a memory bandwidth of 128 GB per second. In addition, this card is a dual-slot card with the need for 2 PCIe power plugs. The first AMD card we will be taking a look at is the HD 7470. These cards were put in many OEM systems, so there are plenty of cards out there, resulting in a very affordable $18 price point. But what do you get for that money? You get a DirectX 11 capable Terascale 2 GPU with 160 stream processors at a 775 MHz core clock. It also comes with 1GB of GDDR5 with a 64-bit memory bus and a 14.4 GB per second memory bandwidth. In addition, this card is low profile and has no need for any PCIe power plugs. This card is essentially a higher clocked version of the HD 6450, which is the $3 graphics card I made a video of that I got off of ServerMonkey. The next card we're going to look at is the AMD HD 4850. These cards were very popular back when they were released in 2008, meaning there are generally quite a few out there on the used market, and they tend to go for around the $20 or less price point. The HD 4850 is based off of the DX 10.1 Terascale 1 architecture. It has 800 stream processors at a 625 MHz core clock, and this particular card comes equipped with 1GB of GDDR3 with a 256-bit memory bus and a 64 GB per second memory bandwidth. This is a dual slot card that is slightly more efficient than its NVIDIA counterpart, meaning it only needs one extra 6-pin PCIe power plug. The HD 4890 was the fastest single GPU solution by AMD when it was released in 2009 at a price of around $250. Now can be found easily for just $30. And just like the HD 4850, the HD 4890 is based off of the DX 10.1 capable Terascale 1 architecture with 800 stream processors at a reference core clock of 875 MHz. The HD 4890 has the distinction of being the first GPU in the world to break the 1 GHz core clock speed on stock aftermarket cards, so overclocking is incredibly doable on this GPU. In addition, this card has 1GB of GDDR5 with a 256-bit memory bus and a 124.8 GB per second memory bandwidth. In addition, this card is a dual-slot blower design with the need for 2 additional 6-pin PCI power connectors. The HD 7570 was another GPU that was put in many OEM systems. As a result, they can be found quite affordably at an average selling price of around $20 on eBay. The HD 7570 was based off of the DX11 capable Terascale 2 architecture and has 480 stream processors at a 650 MHz core clock. This card also comes equipped with 1GB of GDDR5 with a 128-bit memory bus, giving it a 64 GB per second memory bandwidth. This card also is a single-slot, low-profile card with no need for any additional power plugs, meaning that it will fit in nearly any existing system out there. The final card we will be testing in this Shit Card Showdown will be the AMD HD 5830. The HD 5830 comes in at a reasonable $30 price point, making it an ideal solution for any budget PC builder. The HD 5830 is based off of the DX11 capable Terascale 2 architecture. It comes with 1120 stream processors at an 800 MHz core clock. It also comes with 1GB of GDDR5 with a 256-bit memory bus and a 128 GB per second memory bandwidth. The HD 5830 also has the best I/O of any of the cards tested, with the ability to use HDMI, DisplayPort, or dual-link DVI. The HD 5830 is a dual slot card with the need for 2 additional 6-pin PCI power connectors. The games that were chosen for the benchmarks are a selection of esports and newer multiplayer titles. The goal in selecting games was to cover a large breadth of games that any budget PC gamer may want to play. CSGO was selected to cover the competitive first-person shooter market. We tested this game at 1080p low settings with multi-core rendering enabled. We chose these settings to allow us to take advantage of 1080p while still getting a great frame rate, as this game has a latency that is tied to your FPS, so more frames means that you will be more competitive in this cutthroat competitive Twitch shooter. Rocket League was selected to cover those of you who like competitive arena multiplayer games. We tested this game at the quality 1080p preset, and this game uses OpenGL and will be a good standard for how the cards would perform in other OpenGL based games. World of Warships was benchmarked at 1080p medium settings to cover those PC gamers who like the team versus team vehicular combat games. And Grand Theft Auto 5 was benchmarked at 1080p low. We tested this game because it is still one of the most played online PC games and is still a very popular and extremely requested PC benchmark. It also represents more of a challenge for the lower end cards. We tested Overwatch 1080p low with a 100% render scale, and it was selected to represent newer and up-and-coming cooperative team-based games that use newer APIs. And finally, Battlefield 1 1080p low was selected as a representation for new shooters that are based off of the latest graphics APIs. Battlefield 1 will also be similar in graphical requirements to many up-and-coming games, giving a standard for how the cards will perform in these newer titles. I would love to have tested more games, but I can't fit all of the games out there into one video, so if you have a suggestion for a game or card to be benchmarked, feel free to leave it in the comments. I always read them. And now, finally, let's move on to the test bench. The test bench we use for this showdown is our standard Xeon X3460 benchmarking system. This test rig has a quad-core hyper-threaded Xeon overclocked to just north of 4 GHz with 8 GB of 1333 DDR3. This system should be more than adequate to prevent any bottlenecks on the CPU side. That being said, most people that use a $35 GPU probably don't have an overclocked 7700K, so performance will likely be very similar to what was achieved on this particular setup. Each card will be benchmarked in each game, and we will be awarding points based off of 3 main criteria: highest average frame rate, highest achieved frame per dollar rating, and finally, overall performance. Points will be awarded 10 for first, 9 for second, and 8 for third, and so on in that fashion. If a graphics card can't run a game, it won't receive any points for that particular benchmark. The overall performance is calculated by adding the points earned from both highest average frame rate and highest frame per dollar. And finally, the card with the most overall points at the end of the showdown will be crowned our overall winner. I think that's enough talk for now, so let's get started with the showdown. First up, CSGO. CSGO, most of the cards had a playable frame rate at these particular settings, with the exception of the 8400 GS and maybe the GT520, depending on what you would consider a playable frame rate for this game. The GTX 285 shined in this test with an insane 250 plus FPS frame rate. The 285 took an across-the-board sweep for first place in this test. The 460, 5830, and 4890 got a great average frame rate and got second, third, and fourth place in average frame rate, with the 460 dropping to fourth in frames per dollar due to the higher average cost. The 8400 GS, GT520, and HD 7470 were in last place for all three criteria due to their low performance. The HD 4850 had a middling performance for average frame rate, however, due to its lower price, it performed better in the frame per dollar rating. In general, most of the cards here would be more than adequate for any system dedicated to CSGO. Now, on to Rocket League. The GTX 285 again took a first place sweep. It performed great with an average of over 15 points more than the next best card, the HD 5830. The HD 7470, GT520, and 8400 GS were unplayable at these settings with both poor frame rates and poor frame per dollar ratings. The 5830 again got second place with a great performance and a great value. The GT260 had a marginally good performance, but due to its cheaper price, it performed well in the frames per dollar category. In World of Warships, the HD 5830 got first place, closely followed by the great performing GTX 285. Again, unsurprisingly, the 8400 GS is in last place for all categories. The HD 4890 again had a strong game performance, but due to its relatively high price, it performed averagely for the frame per dollar rating. The HD 7570 performed alright and was the best performing single slot GPU in this game benchmark. Grand Theft Auto is another game that strongly favors Team Green. In addition, we had a very close race as we had a tie for first place between the GTX 285 and the GTX 460, a tie for third place between the HD 5830 and GTX 260, and a tie for sixth place between the HD 7470 and the GT 520. In terms of FPS, Team Green's high shader clock helped them get a full podium placement, with the GTX 285 proving once again that it is the king of all DirectX 10 cards, but the GTX 460 managed to beat it, likely due to its ability to use DirectX 11. The HD 5830 had a solid performance as well at these particular settings, and the only cards that really couldn't play the games were the three lower end ones. Surprisingly, the HD 7570 performed quite well, relatively speaking, in this game, outperforming the HD 4850 and performing very similarly to the quite powerful HD 4890. In Overwatch is where we started to see some of the older Nvidia cards falter. As this game requires at least DirectX 10.1 capable cards, the venerable GTX 285 and 260 couldn't even launch the game. However, the GTX 460 took up the slack with a nearly 100 FPS average. One thing to keep in mind is that this is a heavily factory overclocked card, meaning the reference design one may perform up to 10 to 15% worse. Even so, a reference design card would still have likely beaten the second place GPU, the HD 5830. In terms of overall score, the HD 4850 and 4890 tied for third place with 15 points scored. The HD 4890 performed better, whereas the HD 4850 was again the better value. And the lower three cards were the only ones that couldn't play this game at an acceptable frame rate. Battlefield 1 was the most challenging game we tested, requiring at least DirectX 11, even more of the cards couldn't play it. The GTX 285, 260, 8400 GS, HD 4850, and HD 4890 all could not launch the game due to the lack of API support, and really only the GTX 460 and HD 5830 were playable at these settings. The HD 7570 may have been playable at a lower resolution, however hope for the 7470 and GT 520 ever playing this game at a decent frame rate are spurious at best. In addition, this game is a great representation of how other modern titles would run on these cards at these resolutions and settings. And if you plan on playing more modern titles, the older GTX and Radeon cards probably aren't what you should be getting. Now that we have all the games tested, let's take a look at the winners for value, performance, and the overall combined winner. The winner for overall value is the admirable HD 5830, having a great performance per dollar rating due to its lower average cost and great relative performance. The HD 5830 is the card to get for the sub $35 price point. With the ability to run even the newest DirectX 11 titles at reasonable settings, this is a great choice for a builder on a budget. The GTX 460 did great as well, although a bit more expensive than the 5830, it performed even better, allowing it to receive a good price per frame rating as well. Although the GTX 285 couldn't play newer titles, its stellar performance in the older titles and very low average cost allowed it to get third place in the price per frame category. The HD 4850, GTX 260, and HD 7570 performed alright for their cost. The HD 7570 would be the more future-proof of those three and is by far the most versatile due to its form factor. The HD 4890 didn't do too well in value. With only an average performance and a relatively high price, it's not a great deal, especially considering any new DirectX 11 game won't run on this particular card. The HD 7470, GT 520, and 8400 GS all had relatively poor performances in nearly all of the games, and coupled with a moderate price point, they all performed relatively poorly in the price per frame category. If you were to get a card on value alone in this price point, the HD 5830 would be the clear winner. And now, let's go on to the performance category. The performance winner for the $35 Shit Card Showdown is the stellar GTX 460 with a total of 57 points scored. Easily playing all of the titles at the given settings, this card is a great choice for anyone who wants the most performance for the $35 price point. The HD 5830 came in a close second with 52 points scored. Always bested by either the 285 or 460, it came in second or third in nearly every test. However, due to its better API support, it managed to eke out a win over the GTX 285 that scored a much lower 37 points. If all you want to build is a CSGO machine that can also play GTA, the 285 is the card for you, but if you want to play more modern titles, you may need to look elsewhere. The HD 4890 had a strong performance as well with 35 points scored. With a slightly higher API, both the HD 4890 and 4850 performed better than the distinctly average GTX 260. The HD 7570 performed well with 31 points. With good API support, a small form factor, and no need for extra PCI power, this card is by far the best versatile card tested, and would be a great addition to your parents' PC if you wanted to be able to play a couple more games without the need to upgrade anything else. The HD 7470 did poorly, but still did perform better than the poorer GT 520 and awful 8400 GS. The 8400 GS is in a league of its own when it comes to shitty performance, so if you're looking for a gaming GPU, or a GPU in general, please avoid this waste of money and resources. Alright, now that we've taken a look at performance, now let's look at the combined total and the overall winners. The overall winner for the 4th ever Shit Card Showdown is the fantastic HD 5830 with a total of 104 points scored. Like its bigger brother, the HD 5850, the 5830 wasn't quite as powerful as its Nvidia counterpart, but due to its far superior price, it made it the better value, and in this case, the overall better card. One thing to remember too is that the standard GTX 460 will be up to 10% slower in some games due to the incredible overclock on the card that I was testing. And speaking of the GTX 460, it got a fantastic second place with 101 points scored, with exceptional performance in all of the games tested. All while being a decent value, the GTX 460 is a solid choice for any GPU for the $35 price point. With the support for DirectX 12, this card would be able to support most up-and-coming games in the future, as well as all of the games that it can currently play. You may have to turn down some of the settings in the future, but for now, it's still a solid 1080p gaming choice. For third place, we had the great performing GTX 285. In older titles, this card can't be beat for the price, and especially not the performance. This card dominates on any DirectX 9 or 10 title, and if you're building a PC for CSGO, this card is all you need to get the competitive edge over any pleb in a newer low-end card. However, this card didn't win due to its inability to play newer titles. Any game that requires anything above DirectX 10 cannot be played on this card, meaning any newer game will likely not be able to run on it. Fourth place was a tie between the HD 4890 and the HD 7570 with 63 points scored. The HD 4890 is a good performing card when it comes to older titles. With support for DirectX 10.1, it has slightly more support than the older Nvidia GPUs. However, it's still likely you won't be able to play many newer titles with it. The HD 7570, although it didn't perform quite as well as the HD 4890, it had a better API support. With support up to DirectX 11, it should be able to play many of the up-and-coming games, although at lower settings and resolutions. The HD 4850 got a solid 6th place with 60 points scored. This card was both a great value as well as an alright performer. Again, with only DirectX 10.1 support, the games it can play are limited. The GTX 260 was an alright card at 7th place. With a score of 58 points, it's a decent value for older games, but anything new? Forget about it. The HD 7470 got a lower than average 8th place with only 46 points scored. This card was the best of the worst cards tested. With support for DirectX 11, it can technically play most games, but the frame rates, resolutions, and settings might not exactly be desirable. Even so, it did better than the more expensive GT 520 that only got 38 points in 9th place. And finally, last place belongs to the distinctly awful 8400 GS with only 14 points scored. It got last place in every category, and I probably would have given it worse if I could have. And objectively speaking, it's the worst thing released since the reveal of Star Wars Episode 1. So there you have it. If you're looking for a sub $35 GPU for your ultra budget PC or just something to upgrade your pre-built, the HD 5830 and GTX 460 are both great options. Just try to avoid the 8400 GS, GT 520 and HD 7470, and if you do that, you'll probably get a card worthwhile. If you guys have any suggestions for cards to test in the future, or a video game that you'd like to see benchmarked, make sure to let me know in the comments section below. I always read them. And as always, thank you folks very much for watching. May your frame rates be high and your prices low. And I'll catch you folks next time.